Have you ever loved a child who wasn't yours, yet felt like they were meant to find you? Claire Hart had spent her whole life doing the right thing. A nurse, a sister, a woman who gave more than she asked. She never expected to start over in her late 30s alone and quietly healing from a loss no one really saw. But then came the knock on the door, and a baby that wasn't hers, and a man still grieving his wife, but desperate for someone to help his son survive. Would you say yes? Would you agree to nurse a stranger's child, knowing it might mean stepping into another woman's life, her memories, her home, and maybe even her place in someone's heart? This isn't a story about fairy tale love. It's about choices no one talks about stepping into grief not to fix it, but to sit with it, and how sometimes the most extraordinary bonds begin with the most impossible request. If you've ever felt lost, but still wanted to love again, this story is for you. So stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, where the quietest moments often hold the loudest truths. Let's begin. The phone rang at exactly 12:07. Ma. Claire Hart stirred from her sleep, blinking at the glowing screen on her nightstand. For a moment, she wasn't sure if it was real. No one called her this late. Not anymore. She reached for the phone, her fingers brushing the soft quilt she'd crocheted during long, silent evenings. The name on the screen. Zoe Palmer sent a small jolt through her. Claire answered. Zoe. Her friend's voice came through in a rush, breathless and edged with panic. Claire, I'm so sorry. I wouldn't call unless please don't hang up. I need you. I really, really need you. Claire sat up straighter in bed. What's going on? There was a pause, a shaky breath on the other end. It's the baby, Zoe said. He won't eat. He's been screaming for hours. He's rejecting every bottle. I've tried everything. Claire's heart gave a familiar ache at the word baby. Which baby? She asked carefully. Leo Wolf, Zoe whispered. Claire, he's not okay. He hasn't had a full feeding in almost 2 days. Claire was quiet, digesting the name. Leo Wolf, the 5-month-old son of Adrian Wolf, tech mogul, widower, media recluse. The tabloids called him the genius ghost. His wife had died in childbirth. He hadn't made a public appearance since. And now, his baby wouldn't eat. Zoe. I'm not a miracle worker, Claire said softly. You should be in a hospital. I already took him to the ER, Zoe replied, voice breaking. They said there's nothing medically wrong. Just he won't take formula, not even donor milk in a bottle. But Claire, her voice cracked. They suggested direct nursing. I told them you might still be producing. Claire closed her eyes. It had been over 2 years since she lost her own son, stillborn at 38 weeks. She'd pumped for months afterward, donating to local milk banks. Not because anyone told her to, because she needed to give that love somewhere. To someone. Zoe continued. I remember you told me. You still had some supply. You said it helped. Emotionally. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. Her chest tightened. I'm not, she began. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. I wouldn't, Zoe said. But I'm scared, and his father is losing it. I think he's downstairs right now, trying to bribe a hospital administrator. Please, Claire, just help. Just one feeding, just tonight. There was silence. Claire looked out the window. Her small apartment in Cambridge was quiet. The street lamp cast soft shadows on the snow-covered sidewalk below. Life had slowed down for her, grown hushed and predictable. And yet beneath the layers of time and grief, there was still something alive inside her. Something tender. Something unfinished. She swung her legs over the bed. "I'll get dressed," she said. 20 minutes later, Claire stood in the upscale lobby of the Wolfe Residences, a sleek tower of glass and marble near the Charles River. Zoe met her at the private elevator, face pale, hair a mess. "He's still crying," Zoe whispered, her voice barely audible over the faint, high-pitched wail echoing down the hallway. "Mr. Wolfe is upstairs. He doesn't talk much." Claire stepped in. "Let's just focus on the baby." The penthouse smelled of cedar and clean linen. Everything was sharp, minimalist, too perfect, except for the living room, which looked like a tornado had passed through blankets everywhere, bottles scattered, a stuffed giraffe on the floor. And in the middle of it all, a man pacing, tall, late 30s, dark hair, slightly disheveled, gray t-shirt, barefoot, eyes bloodshot but fiercely alert. Adrian Wolfe looked like he hadn't slept in days. He turned the moment Claire walked in. "You're the nurse?" he asked, his voice low and clipped. "I'm Claire," she replied evenly. "I'm here because of Zoe and the baby." He nodded once, quickly. "He won't eat. He won't sleep. They said I needed someone like you. I don't know what else to do." She looked at the infant in his arms. Leo's face was flushed, his little fists curled tight, his sobs hoarse and desperate. Claire's heart pulled. "May I?" she asked gently. Adrian hesitated, then handed Leo over, carefully, almost reverently. Claire sat down on the couch, cradling the baby against her. She whispered something soft, instinctive, as she adjusted him to her chest. Leo rooted almost immediately. Within seconds, the room fell into a hush. Adrian stared, eyes wide. Claire didn't speak. She only held the baby, her breath catching as she felt the soft pull of nursing begin. The warmth, the quiet. It had been 2 years since she felt that. And still, it felt like coming home. 10 minutes later, Leo slept peacefully against her shoulder, tiny body rising and falling in steady rhythm. Zoe stood to the side. Stunned, Adrian knelt down, elbows on his knees, watching Leo sleep. "You really did it," he said, more to himself than anyone. He stopped. Claire nodded, still not looking up. "This isn't a long-term solution. It's not safe, not sustainable. But for tonight, it helped." She expected him to nod, to say thank you, to leave it at that. Instead, he looked at her with eyes that weren't just tired anymore, they were pleading. "What if we make it work? Just for a few more days?" Claire didn't answer right away. She sat on the Wolfe penthouse couch, baby Leo still curled against her chest, his breath warm and steady. His tiny fingers gripped the edge of her sweater, and the soft rise and fall of his body was the only sound in the room. Adrian Wolfe watched her from just a few feet away. The sharp angles of his face had softened since she'd arrived, but the strain was still there, etched into the lines around his eyes, folded into the tension in his jaw. "You want this to be regular?" Claire finally asked, her voice quiet. "You want me to keep nursing him?" Adrian straightened slightly, as if he'd heard judgment in her tone. "Just for a few days, until he transitions. The pediatrician said it could take a week, maybe 2. I'll pay you whatever you ask." Claire bristled, not from the offer, but from the implication beneath it. I'm not doing this for the money. Mr. Wolf, she said, looking him in the eye. This isn't something you just pay for. Adrian blinked, caught off guard. I didn't mean to offend. I don't know how this works. I'm flying blind. Claire nodded slowly, shifting Leo gently in her arms. Well, for starters, this isn't medieval Europe. Women don't go around wet nursing as a career path. I realize that now, he said, and to her surprise, a flicker of wry humor passed across his face. She stood carefully, cradling Leo as he slept. I'll need to talk to my doctor. Get medical clearance. You'll need legal documents, liability forms. And I'll need to see Leo's medical history. I'll have my assistant send everything over in the morning. Claire hesitated. This still felt surreal. Less than an hour ago, she'd been asleep in her quiet apartment. Now she stood in a billionaire's living room, holding his child like he was her own. She looked down at Leo's face, so soft, so trusting, and felt her resolve tremble. One feeding, she said. That's what tonight was. Just one. Adrian nodded, understood. Zoe gave her a ride home. The car rolled through silent Boston streets. The city hushed under the weight of the early morning hour. Claire stared out the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. You okay? Zoe asked, glancing over. Claire exhaled. Not really. Zoe bit her lip. I'm sorry I dragged you into this, but you were incredible. You saved that little boy tonight. Claire looked down at her palms. I never thought I'd do that again. Hold a baby like that. Not after she didn't finish. Zoe reached over, squeezed her hand. They didn't need to say it. They both remembered. The next day, Adrian's legal team sent over a non-disclosure agreement, a short-term service contract, and a file of Leo's medical records. Claire reviewed it, all over black coffee at her kitchen table. Her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Leo had been born slightly premature, just under 6 pounds, 10 ounces, but otherwise healthy. Since his mother's passing, he had struggled with digestion, weight gain, and bottle refusal. It was a classic case of emotional attachment loss. Claire knew the signs well, not just in infants. She signed the contract, 2 feedings a day, for 1 week, with an option to extend if necessary. It wasn't a job. She wouldn't call it that. It was something else. By the 3rd day, the apartment at the top of Wolf Tower no longer felt like a stranger's home. The staff were rarely around. Adrian worked behind closed doors. And Leo had stopped crying the moment Claire entered the room. There was a rhythm to it now. She would arrive around 8 a.m., greet Zoe and the sleepy-eyed baby, nurse him in the sunlit nursery overlooking the river, and then leave quietly, returning for the evening feeding at 7:30 p.m. Adrian never hovered, but he was always present. Sometimes he'd stand near the window while she fed Leo, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Other times, he'd sit across the room and ask small questions. How long were you a nurse? Did you always work in maternity? What made you want to donate milk after? Claire answered only what she felt ready to. But one afternoon, as Leo dozed on her shoulder, she looked over and said, I lost a child. 2 years ago. A boy. Adrian said nothing, but his expression changed subtle, like a light dimming behind a curtain. I'm sorry, he said after a long pause. I pumped for months. Claire continued. It made me feel like I was still useful, still connected to him somehow. Adrian nodded. Slowly. I get that. It was the most honest moment they'd shared. On the 5th night, Evelyn Wolfe arrived. Claire hadn't been warned. She'd just finished feeding Leo when the front door opened, and a voice rang out, measured, clipped, laced with authority. Adrian, are you here? The board meeting ended early. I thought I'd stop by. Claire froze. She turned to see a tall, silver-haired woman enter the room, coat draped over one arm, a designer purse on the other. Evelyn stopped short at the sight of Claire holding Leo. I'm sorry, she said, eyes narrowing. Who are you? Claire stood slowly. I'm Claire. I'm helping with Leo. Evelyn's gaze dropped to the baby. Her eyes sharpened. Helping? How Adrian appeared from the hallway, his voice calm. Claire's working with us temporarily. She's nursing Leo. There was a silence so thick it pressed against the walls. You hired a wet nurse, Evelyn asked, incredulous. In 2025, Claire swallowed. She opened her mouth. But Adrian spoke first. Leo wasn't thriving. We were out of options. Evelyn looked at Claire again. This time, her expression wasn't curious. It was defensive, critical. I see. She turned to Adrian. May I speak with you? Privately? Adrian glanced at Claire, then nodded. Claire remained by the crib, heart thudding. Leo slept soundly, oblivious. But Claire could already feel it. This arrangement wouldn't stay quiet much longer. The next morning, Claire almost didn't go. She stared at the pale light slipping between the blinds of her kitchen window, her coffee growing cold beside her. The signed contract lay on the table, along with Leo's chart and a calendar marked with feeding times. Everything orderly, everything reasonable. But last night's encounter with Evelyn Wolfe had shaken her. The woman's tone, her eyes so sharp, so sure, had sliced through Claire in a way she hadn't expected. She'd faced difficult families in the hospital before, mothers-in-law who knew better, husbands who questioned every nurse's move. But this had felt personal, judgment without understanding. You hired a wet nurse in 2025. The words still echoed. Claire closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. By 7:50 she was at the Wolfe penthouse again. She told herself she came for Leo. And maybe that was true. Zoe greeted her at the door with a tight smile and a worried glance. She's gone, she whispered. Flew back to New York late last night. But she wasn't happy. I noticed, Claire replied dryly. Adrian wasn't in sight. Claire didn't ask. Instead, she walked quietly to the nursery, where Leo was already stirring in his crib. When she lifted him, he blinked up at her and let out a soft coo, then reached for her sweater, the way he always did, as if he knew. Claire smiled, tears threatening. She sat in the glider by the window and began to feed him. 30 minutes later, Adrian appeared in the doorway. He looked tired more than usual. The shadows beneath his eyes were deeper. His sleeves were rolled up. And he held a mug of coffee in one hand, like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Hi, he said. Claire glanced up but didn't speak. He stepped into the room, hesitated, then sat on the edge of the window seat, just a few feet from her. She thinks I'm reckless, he said. That I'm making impulsive decisions because I'm overwhelmed. Claire looked down at Leo. Are you? Adrian stared into his coffee. Sometimes. But not this. Claire adjusted Leo gently as he nursed. The baby's fingers rested lightly on her collarbone. There was something sacred in the quiet between them. I know how it feels, she said after a while, when people assume they understand your grief better than you do. Adrian glanced at her. Claire's voice remained steady, but her eyes were fixed on the skyline beyond the nursery window. After my son died, people tried to help. They brought casseroles, said the usual things. He's in a better place. It wasn't meant to be. You can try again. They meant well, but it was like every sentence erased what I had lost, as if grief had an expiration date. Adrian's expression shifted. He said nothing, but his silence was full of listening. I kept pumping. Claire continued. Even after the funeral, my doctor told me I could stop, but I didn't want to. It was the only thing I had left that felt like connection. She paused. You're the first person I've told that. Adrian set down his mug on the floor, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice quiet. When Claire died, I didn't cry. Not at first. I just functioned. Planned the funeral, signed documents, hired help, smiled when I needed to, and every night I held Leo and thought, you're the reason she's gone. Claire's breath caught, but then Adrian said, he started looking at me, recognizing me, laughing. It's like he knew I blamed him, and he forgave me anyway. Claire looked at him, really looked, not as the distant tech mogul or the man who signed her checks, but as someone walking through the same quiet war zone she had. I don't think grief ever goes away, she said softly. It just changes shape, becomes part of you, like a scar that fades, but never fully disappears. Adrian nodded, eyes distant. A long pause stretched between them. Then Leo let out a sleepy sigh, his small body going limp against Claire. Adrian stood. I'll take him. Claire carefully transferred Leo into his father's arms. The baby barely stirred, nestling easily against Adrian's chest. Adrian looked down at him, then back at Claire. I'm glad you came today. Claire gave a small nod. Me too. As she gathered her things, Adrian walked her to the door. By the way, he said before she stepped out, I'm hosting a small meeting at the lake house in Vermont this weekend. It's mostly for Leo's pediatrician and a child development specialist I brought in from New Hampshire. They'd like to observe his feeding routine. And you. Claire paused. You want me to come? Yes. Just for the weekend. There's a guest room. Zoe will be there. Leo will need you. Claire hesitated. This isn't a job to me, she said. Not anymore. I need to know where the lines are. Adrian's voice softened. There were lines. Claire stared at him. Then she gave a quiet sigh. I'll think about it. That evening, as she rocked gently in her living room chair, watching the sunset cast golden light across her walls, Claire opened the small cedar box she kept tucked away on the highest shelf of her closet. Inside were three things: a pair of newborn socks, a hospital bracelet with her son's name, and a folded letter she'd written to him, but never sent anywhere. She unfolded the letter and traced the words with her fingertips. I don't know who I'll be without you, but I'll try to be someone you'd be proud of, someone kind, someone brave enough to love again. She looked out the window, the sky now deepening into a soft indigo. and for the first time in a long time she considered it. The air in Vermont was cooler than Claire had expected. The Wolf family lake house sat tucked into a grove of pine trees beside a still, dark lake, its surface glassy beneath the pale October sky. The drive had taken just over 3 hours from Boston, winding through rolling hills painted in gold and rust. Claire had agreed to come reluctantly, cautiously, not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much, and that was becoming a problem. The line between nurse and something else was already beginning to blur. Zoe met her in the gravel driveway, waving from the wraparound porch like they were old summer friends. "You made it," she called, jogging down the steps. Claire stepped out of her car, stretching her stiff legs. "It's beautiful," she said, glancing around, "and quiet." Zoe smiled knowingly. "It's wolf quiet, which means there are 3 staff members inside pretending to be invisible, a top-tier pediatrician arriving in an hour, and enough security cameras to make the Pentagon jealous." Claire smirked. They walked together toward the front door. "Where's Leo?" Claire asked. "Napping. He's been doing so much better. Sleeping longer stretches, giggling. He lit up when I told him you were coming." Claire's heart ached a little. She pushed the feeling down. Inside, the house was spacious and understated natural wood beams. Soft light, large windows facing the lake. Claire was shown to a guest suite on the second floor, a cozy room with a fireplace, a rocking chair, and a view of the water. As she unpacked, she heard footsteps in the hallway. A soft knock followed. It was Adrian. He stood in the doorway in a dark flannel shirt and jeans, a look that made him seem more human, less like the distant figure she had first met. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said. Claire turned, surprised. "For what?" "For coming. I know it wasn't easy." She studied him for a moment. "No, it wasn't." They stood in silence for a beat too long. "I thought you'd be in the master suite," she said, half teasing, half probing. "I moved into the guest wing," Adrian replied. "Didn't feel right staying in the room I shared with Claire. I haven't been back here since the funeral." Claire nodded gently. She didn't ask more. She didn't need to. Later that afternoon, the pediatrician arrived, Dr. Eliza Penner, a compact, sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s with a voice like warm gravel. She reviewed Leo's updated growth chart with Claire and Adrian, nodding approvingly. "He's gained nearly a full pound since last week," she said. "Feeding response is excellent. Bonding behaviors are strong. Claire, whatever you're doing, it's working." Claire gave a modest smile. "It's mostly him." Eliza's gaze lingered on her. "Have you considered making this arrangement more permanent?" Adrian looked up. Claire froze. Eliza continued casually. "There are other families who'd benefit from someone with your experience. You have an instinct for this." Claire felt heat rising to her face. "I'm not looking for another job." Eliza raised a brow. "Maybe not. But some jobs find you. Anyway." That night, after Leo's evening feeding, Claire stepped outside onto the back deck. The lake shimmered under a nearly full moon. Pine trees swayed gently, their reflections rippling in the water. She didn't hear Adrian approach until he stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "I keep thinking she'd be angry," he said. Claire glanced at him. "Claire," he added, "she designed this house. She wanted it to be our sanctuary. Now I'm here with someone else. With you." and I wonder if she'd hate that. Claire looked down at the wood beneath her feet. I think grief makes us believe love is a finite thing, she said, but maybe it's not. Maybe there's room for more than one kind of love, room for her memory, and for something new. Adrian nodded slowly. I don't know how to do this, he said, but I want to try. Claire turned toward him, eyes steady. Try what he hesitated, then letting someone in. Claire's heart twisted. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to step forward, close the space between them. But instead, she stepped back. Not yet, she said quietly. Leo comes first. And I need time. I need space. Adrian didn't argue. I understand, he said. She believed he meant it. The next morning, Evelyn Wolfe arrived. Claire saw the car from the upstairs window. A black SUV pulling into the gravel drive, sunlight glinting off its hood. She wasn't supposed to be here not until next week. By the time Claire reached the foyer, Evelyn was already inside, coat still draped over her shoulders, lips pursed in polite disapproval. Ms. Hart, she said. Still here. I see. Claire met her gaze calmly. Just for the weekend. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. Of course. She turned toward the stairs without waiting for further exchange. Claire watched her go, her stomach tight. Something had shifted. This wasn't just disapproval anymore. It was scrutiny. Later that day, during a lunch gathering for the pediatric team, Evelyn re-entered the room just as Dr. Penner was praising Claire's involvement. I'm not surprised, Evelyn said smoothly. Claire seems to have quite the hold on the household these days. The room quieted. Claire straightened. I'm here because Leo needs consistency. And what happens, Evelyn asked, when he no longer needs you? Claire's voice was calm. Then I'll step away. Evelyn smiled coldly. Let's hope that happens sooner rather than later. That night, Claire sat alone on the dock. The water lapped gently below. Somewhere behind her, Leo had fallen asleep to one of Zoe's lullabies. The house glowed softly in the distance, warm and unreachable. Claire wrapped her arms around herself. She didn't cry, but she felt the distance. Not just from Evelyn, from Adrian, from Leo, from everything she'd allowed herself to feel too quickly. You're the nurse, not the mother, not the wife. You have no place here. She let the thought linger. Then, slowly, she pushed it away. Claire awoke to the sound of birds. It took her a moment to remember where she was. The lake house, the guest room, the soft scent of pine wood lingering in the air. The morning light poured through gauzy curtains, casting long stripes across the quilted bedspread. For a brief, quiet moment, it felt like waking from a dream she wasn't ready to leave. Downstairs, someone was humming. She followed the sound to the kitchen, where Zoe stood, barefoot in front of the stove, flipping pancakes while humming off-key to a soft folk tune. Leo sat in a high chair nearby, watching intently with wide blue eyes. He spotted Claire the moment she stepped in and broke into a toothless, dimpled grin. It was small, but it stopped Claire in her tracks. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding herself until that moment. How much space she had created between what she felt and what she allowed herself to show. But Leo, his smile was different. He kicked his feet happily and made a soft sound, arms reaching toward her in a way that was unmistakable. Zoe noticed. Well, look at that. He missed you. He missed Claire approached slowly, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Leo squealed with delight as she leaned in to pick him up. His hands reached for her hair, his little body wiggling with joy. "You're a charmer this morning," she whispered, pressing her cheek to his head. Behind her, Zoe flipped a pancake. "You two are dangerously attached." Claire nodded, not denying it. Later that afternoon, Dr. Penner conducted her final assessment before returning to Boston. Leo passed all developmental checks. Weight gain healthy. Response to stimuli improved. Attachment behavior strong. "He's thriving," Eliza said, setting her clipboard aside. "There's nothing else I can recommend medically." Adrian looked pleased, if a bit distracted. Claire folded Leo's blanket on her lap, a sinking feeling pooling low in her chest. "So that's it?" she asked. Eliza smiled gently. "That's a good thing." "Claire, it means your job here is done." Claire gave a tight nod. Of course, that evening, as golden light bled across the lake, Claire sat on the porch swing, holding Leo after his last feeding. He was heavy in her arms, warm and quiet, drifting toward sleep. Adrian joined her, coffee in hand, wearing a soft gray sweater that made him look younger somehow, less guarded. They sat in companionable silence for a while. "He's not just eating better," Adrian said eventually. "He's alive again. Before you came, he was barely reacting to anything. Now he laughs. He smiles. He reaches." Claire glanced down at the child in her arms. "Babies know when they're safe." Adrian looked at her. "So do adults." She looked away. They didn't speak of Evelyn, though Claire could feel the weight of her presence still lingering throughout the house, like cold air that wouldn't fully leave. Instead, Adrian leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "My board called today. Someone leaked a photo of you and Leo." Claire stiffened. "It's blurry." He added, "You're not named. But people are asking questions." Claire's heart began to thump, slow and steady like a warning. "I knew this wouldn't stay private forever," she said quietly. Adrian didn't reply, but his jaw tightened, ever so slightly. The next morning, headlines hit the local news blogs. "Tech mogul hires private wet nurse for infant son, is it safe?" Or, "Scandalous." Claire stared at her phone in silence. The article was speculative, light on facts, heavy on implication. There were quotes from anonymous sources about how she'd moved in, how she had unusual access, how Adrian had not been seen with another woman since Claire's death. Zoe read over her shoulder and let out a low whistle. "They make it sound like you're running a cult," she muttered. Claire set the phone down, her stomach turning. "I knew it was a risk," she said. "But it still hurts," Zoe offered. Claire nodded. "Do you regret it?" Claire looked toward the nursery, where Leo was napping peacefully, a faint hum from the baby monitor filling the air. "No," she said. "Not for a second." That afternoon, Evelyn returned. She didn't knock, just appeared in the living room like a gust of wind wrapped in expensive perfume. Adrian stood when she entered. Claire remained seated. Evelyn held up her phone. "Have you seen this?" "Yes," Adrian said simply. "This is exactly what I warned you about," Evelyn snapped. "You've given them ammunition? The investors? The media? The family court? If it comes to that?" Claire stood slowly, trying to maintain composure. I didn't leak anything. No, Evelyn said sharply. But you invited this by crossing the line. Adrian stepped between them. She didn't cross the line. He said, she is the line. The room fell still. Claire looked at him, eyes wide. Evelyn exhaled. Controlled but livid. Then I hope you're ready to fight for your choices, she said. Because people are watching now. And they're not as forgiving as that child in your arms. That night, Claire packed her bags. She didn't say goodbye. But as she closed the door to the guest suite, she left behind a note folded carefully on the nightstand. It was short. I never meant to blur the lines, but I won't apologize for loving your son. The city felt louder after Vermont. Claire returned to her apartment in Cambridge just after 10:00 p.m. The taxi's headlights casting thin lines across the sidewalk as she unlocked her front door. The moment she stepped inside, the silence wrapped around her like a wet coat. No coos, no monitor hum, no baby bottles in the sink. Only the dull hum of her refrigerator and the faint creak of old floorboards. She placed her bag on the worn wooden bench by the entryway and stood there for a full minute, listening to the quiet ache of being alone again. Zoe arrived the next morning with 2 coffees and a brow furrowed deep with concern. You look like someone who just broke up with someone they weren't dating, she said, handing Claire a cup. Claire gave a sad laugh. That's exactly how it feels. Zoe sat, kicking off her shoes. Have you heard from him? No, but he read the note. I know that much. Still, nothing. Claire shook her head. Zoe leaned back, watching her closely. So what now? Claire stared into her coffee like it held answers. I go back to work. I get my license reactivated. I remind myself who I was before all this. And Leo Claire didn't reply. Her throat tightened too fast, too suddenly. Zoe reached out and touched her hand. You miss him more than you expected? I miss all of it, Claire whispered. Even the 2 feedings in Back Bay. Adrian stood before a wall of glass, overlooking the city skyline from the 42nd floor of Wolf Media's corporate headquarters. His phone vibrated on the desk for the 3rd time in an hour. He ignored it again. The board wanted answers. Shareholders wanted clarity. A few sponsors were threatening to pull out of philanthropic projects. He had done interviews, delivered statements, sworn it was all medically approved, temporary, practical. But the truth was curled inside the note she had left him. I never meant to blur the lines, but I won't apologize for loving your son. He read it a dozen times, folded it into his wallet like something sacred. And every time he looked at it, he thought, why didn't I ask her to stay, Evelyn? Of course. Had thoughts. She stopped by his office unannounced, as she often did. You could still fix this? She said, without preamble. Issue a new statement. Say she was a temporary caregiver who became too emotionally involved. She wasn't too involved, Adrian replied quietly. She loved him. She loves him. Evelyn arched a brow. That's not the story being told. Then change the story, he said. You have influence. That's not how this works. She snapped. Public sympathy doesn't extend to women who cross boundaries. Adrian, they label them, question them, turn them into cautionary tales. She's not a cautionary tale. No, Evelyn said, her voice softening. She's a threat to how people see your family, to how they see Claire's legacy. Are you ready for that? Adrian turned away, jaw clenched. I already lost one woman I loved to expectations I couldn't meet. He said, I'm not losing another. 3 days later, a package arrived at Claire's apartment. There was no sender listed, but she knew instantly who it was from. Inside was a small envelope, a folded letter, and a tiny plush lion, Leo's favorite toy. Her breath caught. She opened the letter slowly. Claire, I should have stopped you at the door. I should have told you that your place wasn't in the guest room, or on the porch, or even in Leo's nursery. Your place was here with us. You once told me babies know when they're safe. So do men. I miss you. Leo misses you. I'm not asking you to fix anything. Just come back. Let's figure out the rest together. Zoe didn't even knock. She barged in that evening, holding a tablet. You've got to see this, she said, breathless. Claire looked up from the dining table where she'd been sorting through paperwork. Zoe turned the screen toward her. It was a video. Adrian, at a press conference, standing behind a podium with Leo in his arms. Claire's heart jumped. She unmuted it. This is my son, Adrian was saying, voice steady. And this little lion in his hand, my son's favorite, was a gift from a woman named Claire Hart. Some of you know her as the subject of speculation or headlines. But let me tell you who she really is. She's a nurse who saved my son when he was wasting away. She's a woman who held our family together when I didn't know how to. And I love her. Claire's hands flew to her mouth. Tears blurred her vision as Adrian continued. I've spent months telling the world what was appropriate, what was acceptable. But love doesn't care about optics, or press, or polished statements. Love simply shows up at 2 a.m. in a dark nursery. And if she's watching this, Claire, come home. Claire was already grabbing her coat. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt longer than it ever had. Claire stood alone, her coat draped over one arm, the small plush lion clutched tightly in her hand. She hadn't called ahead, hadn't texted, hadn't even given herself time to overthink the decision. She was just there, drawn by something deeper than logic, something that had been growing in her chest since the moment she first held Leo. The elevator chimed, the doors slid open, and there he was, Adrian, in the middle of the foyer, barefoot in jeans and a t-shirt, hair tousled, holding Leo against his shoulder. He looked like he hadn't slept, but his eyes lit up the second he saw her. He didn't move. He just stared. Claire stepped out slowly. I came as fast as I could, she whispered. Adrian's lips parted like he was about to speak, but no words came. Instead, he took a slow, shaky breath and walked toward her. He stopped only when they were inches apart. Leo stirred, blinking up at her. His expression drowsy then, as if recognizing her instantly, gave a soft, happy gurgle. Claire reached out and touched his cheek. And then she looked at Adrian. I saw the press conference, she said softly. Was it too much? He asked, a little breathless. Zoe said it might be too much. Claire laughed, the sound cracked and wet with tears. It was perfect, she said. Adrian swallowed hard. I meant every word. I know. He hesitated. Do you? Before he could finish. She leaned in and kissed him. It was quiet, slow, more like a question than a statement. But when she pulled back, his answer was in the way he rested his forehead against hers and closed his eyes like he finally exhaled after holding his breath for weeks. That night, they didn't talk much. They just existed. Together. Claire gave Leo his evening bottle, humming quietly as he drank, while Adrian lit a fire in the living room. The apartment was warm and still, the only sound the occasional pop of the fireplace and Leo's soft breathing. Later, when Leo was asleep, Adrian sat beside Claire on the couch. "I thought I'd ruined it," he said. "You didn't. I should have said something sooner." Claire looked at him. "You did what grieving people do," she said. "You held on too tightly, and you let go too fast. I've done the same." He looked at her, surprised. "You have?" She nodded. "After my dad died, I shut everyone out for 2 years. Told myself it was practical." Her voice faltered, then steadied again. "Turns out love's not all that practical." "No," he agreed. "But it's worth everything." They sat in silence for a long while. Then Adrian asked, "So, what happens now?" Claire looked down at her hands. "Now we figure it out, one day at a time." The next morning, Claire woke to the sound of soft giggles. She opened her eyes to see Leo crawling toward her across the king-size bed, his tiny fists full of her sweater. Adrian stood in the doorway, coffee in hand, smiling like he couldn't believe the scene was real. Claire scooped Leo up and kissed his head, tears prickling behind her eyes. It felt like home, not the place, the people. Later that week, Evelyn arrived at the penthouse without notice. As always, she stepped inside, glancing around the room, her gaze sharp, measured. She found Claire sitting on the floor with Leo, building towers out of blocks and knocking them down again. "Mrs. Wolf," Claire said, getting to her feet. "Claire," Evelyn said evenly. "May I speak with you?" Claire nodded. They stepped onto the balcony. The city stretched out below them, glass and steel glinting in the winter sun. "I watched the press conference," Evelyn said. "Twice." Claire waited. Evelyn turned to face her. "You've caused quite a stir. I didn't mean to." "I know," Evelyn said, "and I think that's part of why it's working." Claire blinked. Evelyn folded her hands, voice softer now. "You didn't come here to fill a void, or wear my daughter's clothes, or pretend this is some fairy tale. You just came because of Leo." Claire nodded slowly. "I loved Claire," Evelyn said, voice tight. "But I lost her, and I've spent the last year trying to keep things frozen in place. Like if I moved on, I'd be letting her go." Her voice cracked, ever so slightly. "And then I watched my grandson reach for you with that ridiculous lion in his hand," she added with a thin smile. "And I realized maybe letting go isn't the same as forgetting." Claire swallowed hard. "It's not." Evelyn looked out over the city. "You don't need my approval," she said, "but you have it anyway." Claire couldn't speak. She just nodded, the tears finally slipping free. That night, after Leo was asleep, Claire stepped out onto the balcony alone. Adrian joined her a few minutes later, wrapping a blanket over her shoulders. "Mom spoke to you," he asked. "She did," and Claire turned to him, eyes shining. "She said she's not ready, but she's trying." Adrian exhaled, his breath forming small clouds in the air. "I think we all are," he said. He took her hand. They stood like that for a long time, two people trying, hoping, healing, one day at a time. The following Monday, Claire returned to work, not at a hospital, but at Wolf Foundation's new pediatric outreach initiative, a program Adrian had quietly funded during the months of Leo's early recovery. It aimed to support single fathers, grieving families, and children with feeding difficulties, offering everything from mental health care to lactation consulting. Claire would help lead it. Her first day began with a meeting room full of strangers, half of them skeptical, the other half curious. She wore a simple navy blouse and flats, no makeup, no press badge, just her. And they listened. Because when Claire Hart spoke about dignity and healing, about not judging mothers or fathers for struggling to feed their babies, there was no performance, no branding, only lived truth. But outside those walls, the media storm raged on. Headlines flared like spotlights. Wet nurse turned partner scandal or salvation grieving. Mogul's new love. Too soon. Wolf air, fed by stranger. The ethics of emotional care. Claire tried not to read them. She stopped opening her email after the 5th hate message and the 20th viral comment thread dissecting her motives. But it was hard. Harder still was seeing her own face paired with old photos of Claire Wolf on gossip columns and forums filled with strangers comparing them like brands on a shelf. Adrian offered to handle it all. He wanted to issue a cease and desist on the worst offenders. But Claire stopped him. "Let them talk," she said. "We don't owe anyone a version of ourselves they can consume." Adrian looked at her like she was made of something stronger than bone and skin. "You're braver than me," he whispered. "I'm just tired of being afraid," she said. A week later, Zoe visited Claire at the foundation's office. She walked in with a coffee in one hand and a wild grin on her face. "You're on the cover of Woman and Worth," she said. Claire looked up from a stack of grant applications. "I thought we agreed no more headlines." "No. Listen," Zoe said, flipping her phone toward her. "This one's different." Claire stared at the screen. There, beneath a soft focus photo of her holding Leo during a feeding seminar, were the words, "Nurture over noise, the woman who chose compassion in a world that shouted scandal." Claire blinked. "That's not awful." "It's more than not awful," Zoe said. "It's honest. It's human. It's what people needed to hear." Claire exhaled. For once, it felt like the story wasn't being stolen. It was being seen. That evening, Adrian surprised her with a quiet dinner in the rooftop greenhouse he rarely opened to anyone. The vines of jasmine were blooming despite the cold. Tiny fairy lights wound between the planters and citrus trees. He'd brought takeout Claire's favorite Thai place and a bottle of wine they'd opened once before, but never finished. "Celebrating?" she asked, amused, as she settled into the worn love seat beside him. "Maybe," he said. "You've officially survived the news cycle." "Barely." In the article, what did you think? Claire looked at him, touched. "I think someone finally told the truth." Adrian nodded slowly. "There's more I want to tell." She raised an eyebrow. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Claire's breath caught, but when he opened it, there was no ring, just a folded key. To the lake house," Adrian said. "If when you're ready." Claire stared at it, emotions swirling. "Not because I expect you to move in, or because I want you to replace Claire, but because there's nothing about that house I want to live in without you now." Claire swallowed hard. Do I still get the studio? She asked softly. Adrian smiled. Yours? Paint it, destroy it, turn it into a nursery again. Whatever you need. She reached for the key. And this time, when she took it, her hand didn't tremble. 2 days later, the foundation received a letter. No return address, just a plain envelope, handwritten. Claire opened it cautiously. Inside was a photo of a baby girl, swaddled, eyes closed, and a note, My daughter is thriving. Because I saw myself in your story. I stopped hiding. I asked for help. Thank you. Claire read the words twice, then again. Then she folded the note and placed it into the drawer of her desk, alongside a tiny lion rattle and a printout of the article that had finally gotten it right. She closed the drawer gently and smiled. The first snowfall came early that year. Fat, slow flakes drifted across the windshield as Claire drove north. The familiar curves of the highway leading toward Vermont, soft and pale beneath the sky. Leo was asleep in the back seat, his lion plush tucked under one arm, his tiny chest rising and falling with the rhythm of dreams. In the passenger seat sat a canvas tote filled with bottles, burp cloths, and a book she hadn't opened in weeks. Adrian had left the lake house unlocked for her. I'll meet you after the conference, he'd said before boarding his flight to Chicago. But I want you to go ahead. You've earned a weekend of peace. Claire had smiled then, but now, on the quiet road, lined with frozen trees, she felt something deeper. To reclaim this space, not as a symbol of the past, but as the beginning of something her own. The lake house looked the same. Weathered wood and wide glass. Smoke already curling from the chimney, probably thanks to Evelyn, who had insisted someone keep the place warmed and watched. Claire stepped out of the car, stretching stiff limbs. The snow crunched under her boots. She opened the back door, gently lifting Leo into her arms. He stirred but didn't wake. Inside, everything smelled faintly of pine, lavender, and the past. But the silence was kind, not heavy. She carried Leo into the lake suite, the same room that once felt like sacred ground, too full of memory to inhabit. But now, it had changed. The easel was still there, but Claire had left a painting half-finished during their last visit. She looked at it now, not to erase it, but to complete it. That night, after Leo was tucked into the travel crib beside her bed, Claire stepped out onto the deck. The lake shimmered with reflected starlight, black and silver and still. She wrapped herself in a blanket and sat down on the old wicker chair where she and Adrian had once shared cold chamomile tea and the first truths they were brave enough to speak aloud. The wind was soft against her skin, the kind that didn't chill, just whispered. She thought of Claire. She often did, not as a ghost, but as the woman who had loved Leo first and, in her way, had made space for Claire to love him next. Adrian arrived the next afternoon, boots dusted in snow, suit jacket slung over one shoulder. Claire met him at the door with a quiet smile and a steaming mug of coffee. He looked at her for a moment, long and steady. You look like you belong here, he said. She handed him the coffee. So do you. They didn't need a speech or a dramatic moment. The quiet between them said enough. Later, after a walk through the woods with Leo bundled between them in a baby carrier, Claire asked, Do you ever feel guilty being happy? Adrian didn't answer at first. They were standing by the frozen edge of the lake, Leo giggling as a squirrel darted up a tree. "Every day," he said finally, "and also, never." Claire nodded. She understood. "It's like carrying two things at once," she said. He looked at her. "Yes. Joy and grief. Memory and possibility. I used to think I had to pick. I used to think I wasn't allowed to have either," she admitted. He reached for her hand. "Let's carry them together." That evening, Evelyn arrived. Unannounced, of course. She brought with her a tin of ginger cookies, a box of Christmas ornaments from Claire's childhood, and a new onesie for Leo that read Grandma's favorite in gold script. She stayed for dinner, didn't critique the seasoning, didn't rearrange the flowers. She even laughed when Leo threw a spoon onto the floor and clapped as if it were a magic trick. Later, when Claire offered to put Leo to bed, Evelyn followed her to the lake suite and stood quietly by the door as Claire hummed a lullaby. "He adores you," she said softly. Once the baby was asleep, Claire turned. "I adore him too." Evelyn looked around the room. Claire always said she'd raise her children here, paint in the mornings, swim in the afternoons. She loved this place more than anywhere. Claire didn't speak. Evelyn's gaze found hers. "She would have liked you." It wasn't a blessing, not exactly. But it was the closest thing to one that mattered. On their last night at the lake house, after Leo was asleep, Claire and Adrian sat by the fire. No wine, no plans, just the hush of logs crackling and the slow rhythm of two people finally at peace. "I've been thinking," Claire said, "about work, about the foundation." Adrian looked up. "I want to take it further," she said. "Create a mentoring program for young moms and fathers, maybe even home visits for NICU graduates." He smiled. "I'll fund it." "I was hoping you'd say that," she teased. He reached over, lacing their fingers. "I want to do everything with you," he said. "Even the hard things." Claire exhaled, her heart full. Then she whispered the truth she'd been carrying. "I'm scared sometimes," she said, "of being too happy, of it all falling apart." Adrian's thumb brushed her knuckle. "So am I. But I think that's how you know it's real." 6 months later. The lake house was green again. The ice had melted. Wildflowers peppered the trail behind the cabin. Claire stood barefoot on the deck, a mug of lukewarm tea in hand, watching Leo toddle after a squirrel with determined wobble steps. He was 19 months now, all cheeks and curiosity. His curls had grown thick and sun-kissed, and he'd just learned the word why, which he used for everything. Why sky blue? Why toast crunchy? Why bird go? Claire loved every question, even the ones she couldn't answer. Inside, Adrian was hunched over a pile of wooden beams, half cursing, half laughing. He was building a bookshelf, badly. "It's like IKEA won a bet against me," he grumbled as Claire walked in, brushing grass from her hem. "You know, we could have just bought one," she said. "But this is symbolic." "Of what us? Wobbly, uneven, but still standing." She laughed. "You're the most earnest millionaire I've ever met. Lucky for you. I'm also the most in love." Claire rolled her eyes, but her cheeks colored. They weren't married. Not yet. They'd talked about it. Some days, it felt natural. Other days, Claire hesitated not because she doubted Adrian, but because she'd spent so many years building a quiet, independent life that part of her still whispered, "Don't disappear inside someone else's story." But Adrian never asked her to disappear. He asked her to stay visible, to keep painting, to keep pushing for programs she believed in, even when board members resisted. He never finished her sentences or assumed he knew what she needed. And in a world that often rushed to define women, that alone was enough to make her stay. That evening, as golden light poured into the great room, Evelyn arrived. She carried a pie blueberry, still warm, and a pair of gardening gloves. "I thought we'd plant Claire's lilies by the dock," she said, as if this were something they'd planned all along. Claire blinked. "You brought her lilies. She wanted them to bloom here," Evelyn said, setting the pie down. Adrian glanced at Claire. She nodded, her throat tight. Later, the three of them knelt in the damp earth by the shoreline. Leo nearby, digging in the dirt with a plastic spoon. Evelyn pressed a bulb into the soil. Her voice was soft. "It's funny. When Claire died, I thought everything beautiful would die with her. But it didn't." She looked up. "I see her in him, but I also see something new, something I didn't expect." Claire said nothing, her hands muddy, heart full. That night, Claire and Adrian sat on the deck after Leo was asleep, fireflies blinking in the dark. Adrian leaned back in the old rocking chair, fingers laced behind his head. "You know, I thought the big moments would be grand," he said. Claire raised an eyebrow, and turns out, the small ones hit harder, like planting flowers with your dead wife's mother. He laughed softly. "Exactly." Claire turned toward him. "I want to get married," she said, surprising even herself. Adrian stilled. "You do?" "Yes," she said, slowly, "but not because it's expected. Not for the name or the headline. I want to get married because I want to wake up with you in Vermont, and I want Leo to see us make each other better. Not perfect." Adrian exhaled. "Then let's do it," he said. "Let's build something. Uneven and wobbly and beautiful." They married quietly. No press. No white gown. Just a small group at the lake house, barefoot in the grass. Leo carrying the rings in a tiny velvet box. Zoe cried through most of it. Evelyn read a passage Claire once wrote in her journal about love and imperfection. Adrian promised to listen before solving. Claire promised to keep painting, even when things got messy. They exchanged vows as the wind rustled the lilies. And later that night, as Leo snored in his crib, they slow danced in the great room with no music, no audience, and no performance, only presence, only peace. Epilogue. 1 year later. The Wolf Family Foundation's new campus opened its doors in early summer. Claire stood beneath a wide white banner that read, "The Claire Wolf Center for Nurture and Healing." Adrian had insisted on the name. "It's not just for her," he'd said. "It's for what she represents, what you've carried forward." Claire gave the opening speech. It was short, soft, unapologetically human. She spoke of vulnerability as strength, of parenting as partnership, of grief as a thread you don't cut, but learn to braid into your life. People listened, not because she raised her voice, but because she didn't need to. Back home that evening, Leo tugged at her sleeve. "Read the story," he said. "Which one?" He pointed to a worn book on the shelf, The Lion in the Sky. Claire smiled. Again, he said. So she opened the pages, read the tale of a tiny lion who lost his way in a thunderstorm. but found a safe hill beneath a tree where a strange woman whispered lullabies and helped him find the stars again. Adrian leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. She wrote that for him. He said, "I wrote it for all of us," Claire whispered. As Leo drifted off, his tiny fingers curled around the hem of Claire's sleeve. She looked at her husband, at her son, at this messy, beautiful, unexpected life. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was waiting for the next chapter. She was already living it. Life doesn't always give us a second chance, but sometimes it gives us something better, a new beginning, disguised as a disruption. This story isn't just about love, it's about courage. The courage to show up in someone else's grief. To say yes when life hands you a role you didn't ask for. It reminds us that healing doesn't come in a straight line, and love doesn't always knock in familiar ways. For many of us, especially as we grow older, we carry stories of loss, of letting go, of wondering if certain chapters are behind us forever. But Claire's journey teaches us that even when we think we've settled into the quiet, life can still surprise us with purpose, with connection, with family. Maybe the most powerful love isn't the one that begins with romance, but the one that begins with compassion. So if you're ever faced with an unexpected door, don't be afraid to open it. You never know who or what might be waiting on the other side. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. If this story touched your heart, made you reflect, or simply reminded you of something true in your own life, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Your support helps us continue bringing gentle, meaningful stories that speak to the soul. And don't forget to leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts or your own story. Until next time, take care of your heart and each other.